My stepfather slammed his hand on the dinner table and told me I was done with college unless I apologized to my stepsister for a crime I never committed. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him and said, "Okay." By 6 the next morning, my closet was empty. My stepsister stood frozen in my doorway, whispering, "Please tell me you didn't email it." My mother stopped chewing mid-bite. Email what? I'm Reagan, 26 years old, and at the time all this happened, I was a few months out from finishing my master's in forensic accounting at a state school outside Charlotte. We weren't old money, we weren't even close. My mother, Denise, had married my stepfather, Walt Brennan, when I was 9, and Walt had built a chain of regional auto dealerships into something that actually mattered. 11 locations across North and South Carolina, a name people in our town recognized on billboards along I-77. To the Rotary Club and the church potlucks, the Brennans were the picture of small-town success. Behind the garage doors of our McMansion in Lake Norman, it was a different story. I was never going to be Walt's favorite. That title belonged, permanently and unconditionally, to my stepsister Brooke. Brooke was Walt's biological daughter from his first marriage, 29, blonde gorgeous in the kind of way that got her free drinks and free passes her whole life. She had the title VP of Operations at the dealership group, a job she'd been handed at 23 with zero relevant experience, and she had Tyler. Tyler was 31, came from a Connecticut prep school lineage, all boat shoes and a last name that sounded like it belonged on a yacht club roster. He told everyone his family still had money in old textile mills up north. Walt ate it up. A son-in-law with that kind of pedigree marrying into the Brennan name. Walt thought it made him untouchable, like proximity to old WASP money could scrub the new money smell off the dealerships. He made Tyler CFO of the entire operation within a year of the wedding. Tyler had an MBA from a school nobody had heard of and a talent for making numbers say whatever he wanted them to say. 2 weeks before that dinner, I'd been doing a favor for Walt, pulling together quarterly reports for his accountant because his actual finance team was, in his words, too slow. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Buried under a vendor code for fleet detailing services, there were six-figure payments going out monthly to an LLC registered in Delaware that didn't show up anywhere in the dealership's actual vendor contracts. I pulled the thread. It led to a second LLC. Then a numbered account that, when I cross-referenced the wire routing prefix, traced to a bank in the Cayman Islands. I brought it to Walt privately, on a Tuesday, printouts in a folder, like an idiot who thought facts mattered to people who'd built their identity on appearances. Brooke found out I'd talked to her father before I even finished the conversation. Walt must have called her the second I left his office. She showed up at the house that night, sobbing that I was trying to destroy her marriage out of jealousy, that I'd always resented her for having a real family, that I was making up lies because I was bitter and alone. Tyler put his arm around her and gave me this calm, pitying smile, like he was talking down a hostage negotiator. "We know grad school is stressful, Reagan. Maybe you should talk to someone." That brought us to Sunday dinner. Pot roast, my mother's good china, Walt at the head of the table announcing, in front of all of us, that he was done paying my last semester's tuition. $22,000 he'd promised me a year ago, unless I got on my knees, his words, and apologized to Brooke and Tyler for slandering them. My mother sat there in silence the way she always did when Walt raised his voice, which told me everything about whose side she'd already picked. I didn't cry, I didn't argue the financials again. I folded my napkin, set it on the table, looked Walt dead in the eye, and said the one word he clearly wasn't expecting. Okay, what?" he barked, leaning forward like I'd misunderstood him. "Okay, keep the money." I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked upstairs. I didn't slam the door. I locked it quietly and sat down at my desk with my laptop, and for the first time since I'd found that Delaware LLC, I let myself feel something other than dread. It was clarity. I'd spent the last 2 years of grad school doing a cybersecurity certificate on the side, mostly because I liked the puzzle of it, never thinking I'd need it for anything other than a resume line. Walt's home office network ran through the same router as his dealership's remote VPN, a security hole his actual IT guy had warned him about twice, and Walt had ignored both times because upgrading cost too much. I'd helped set that VPN up myself the summer before, which meant I still had the admin credentials sitting in an old email from when I'd done it. I plugged in a flash drive and got to work. It took most of the night. I bypassed the dummy ledger Tyler kept on the surface, clean, boring, audit-ready, and found the real one buried 3 folders deep in a hidden directory labeled, with the kind of arrogance only a man who's never been caught can manage, Q Reports Internal. Inside it, months of falsified vendor invoices for fleet detailing and part shipments that never happened, all routed to a Delaware shell, all signed off by Brooke as VP of Operations. She wasn't an oblivious wife, she was initialing the fraud herself. By 4 a.m. the download was done. I packed only what was mine, my own clothes I'd bought with my own paychecks, my books, my electronics, none of the designer stuff my mother used as leverage to drag me to her country club events. I left no note, there was nothing left to explain. At 6, Brooke barged into my room without knocking, coffee mug in hand, fully expecting to find me red-eyed and begging. Instead, she found an empty closet and a stripped desk. Her face went white. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded, all the practiced sweetness gone from her voice. "You're not leaving until you apologize to my husband." I didn't answer her. I picked up my bags and walked past her down the stairs, where my mother and Walt were already standing in the kitchen in their robes, summoned by Brooke's shrieking. Walt's face was dark red. "You think you can just walk out of this house," he said. "You'll be nothing without this family's name behind you." I stopped at the door and turned around. "I am already something," I said. "I'm the only person in this house who can actually read a balance sheet." Then I looked straight at Tyler, who'd come down last, still tying his robe, looking confused. "Tyler, might want to double-check the Q reports file before Monday. It would be a shame if those Delaware routing numbers ended up somewhere they shouldn't." The color left his face instantly. "What did you just say?" he whispered. I didn't wait for an answer. My Uber was already at the curb. I climbed in, and as we pulled away, I watched Tyler pull out his phone with shaking hands, all dialing someone. The first hit came fast. By the time my Uber dropped me at a Motel 6 off the interstate, my debit card was declined, so was my backup credit card. Walt and my mother had called the bank and frozen every account with my name on it, including the one where my own paychecks from my internship got deposited. I paid the driver with the $40 I had folded into my phone case for emergencies and checked into a room that smelled like bleach. That was just the opening move. By that afternoon, Brooke had posted a tearful video to our church's private Facebook group, the one with 300 members who all knew our family from Easter services and the annual chili cook-off, claiming I'd stolen jewelry and cash from the house and run off in the middle of the night, that the family had tried to get me help for my mental health, that they were praying for me to come home. The comments piled up fast. People I'd known my whole calling me unstable, ungrateful, a thief. She'd made sure that if I ever tried to tell anyone what Tyler was actually doing, I'd already be discredited before I opened my mouth. Then came the university email. Formal, clinical, devastating. I was being summoned to an emergency disciplinary hearing the next morning. Tyler, using his title as CFO and as a major donor liaison through the dealership group's sponsorship of the business school, had filed a complaint accusing me of corporate espionage and unauthorized network access. My enrollment was suspended pending review. I sat on that stiff motel bed and laughed, dry and humorless. The man stealing real money was accusing me of theft. He needed me out of the program because losing my student access meant losing the forensic lab tools and faculty connections that could help me trace the rest of what he'd done. He was trying to dismantle my future before I could touch his, so I didn't sleep. I spent the night building a map. Every fake invoice, every Delaware wire, every signature Brooke had put on a document she had to have known was fraudulent. By sunrise, I had a stack of printouts 40 pages thick, a shower, and my sharpest gray suit. The disciplinary board sat behind a long table like a panel of judges who'd already made up their minds. Dean Whitfield, a man who owed his last building renovation to a Brennan Motors naming rights check, told me to sit. I didn't. He read me Tyler's complaint with theatrical disappointment and told me my enrollment was terminated effective immediately, that I should clear out my locker by noon. I set my own folder on the table instead. Inside was what I'd found doing an unrelated internship project 6 months earlier, discrepancies in the university's own endowment fund. Money that was supposed to go toward a new science building quietly funneled into a private firm owned by the dean's brother-in-law. Nearly $3 million over 4 years. I watched every bit of color drain from his face as he read it. "I'm not here to beg for my spot," I told him. "I'm here to talk about your endowment fund." By the time I walked out 20 minutes later, I had a full scholarship for my final semester, a guaranteed approval on my thesis, and a written statement that the university found no evidence of wrongdoing in Tyler's complaint. Spencer, no, Tyler, had handed me a weapon and I'd used it on someone else entirely. I had 6 months left until graduation. 6 months to disappear, to let my family believe they'd broken me, while I quietly built the case that would actually end them. I didn't speak to a single one of them for half a year. I lived in that motel for 2 months, then found a tiny studio on the cheap side of town, working overnight shifts at a diner to cover groceries while keeping my GPA perfect during the day. I poured every spare hour into the data on that flash drive, tracing the layering, fake invoices through the dealership group's domestic accounts, money moving to a Delaware shell, then wired out to a holding company in the Caymans, then quietly routed back into the US through family trusts. I ran the beneficiary names. They weren't Brooks, they were Tyler's, his parents and 2 older brothers in Connecticut, propping up a textile fortune that had actually collapsed 2 decades earlier and was buried in debt nobody at our dinner table knew about. Graduation came on a humid Saturday in May. No one from my family was in the crowd. I walked across that stage top of my class completely alone and felt nothing close to sadness about it. 3 weeks later, I started as a junior forensic investigator for the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division. After a background check so thorough, I had to disclose my own estrangement from my family in writing. My supervisor, a blunt, no-nonsense man named Agent Calloway, called me into his office on a rainy Tuesday about 4 months in. He dropped a thick classified file on his desk and told me they'd been building a task force around a regional auto group laundering money through fake vendor contracts and offshore shells. He didn't say the name, he didn't have to. I already knew whose face was on the surveillance photo clipped to the front page. "I know they're your family," he said, watching me closely. "Can you separate that from the job?" "I don't have a family," I told him. "I have a target list." He gave me full clearance that day. I spent the next 3 days barely leaving my cubicle, matching my old data against the federal trail they already had, filling in exactly the gaps they'd been stuck on for months. I tracked timestamps from Tyler's sloppy local server cache straight into the Swift banking network and confirmed every dollar's final resting place. I pulled Brooke's corporate email. She still used her own birthday as a password 3 years running, and found her demanding bigger draws from the fake part shipment account to cover a Hermes bag and a country club initiation fee, calling our parents easy marks in writing. I pulled internal office camera footage from the dealership headquarters and isolated audio of her signing fraudulent invoices while joking with Tyler about how oblivious Walt was. It wasn't naivety, it was complicity with a smile on it. I ran into Brooke and my mother by accident 3 weeks later, at an outlet mall an hour from my apartment, both of them loaded down with shopping bags. My mother spotted me first and said, loud enough for the people around us to hear, "Well, look who finally crawled out of whatever hole she's been hiding in." Brooke held up her left hand to show off a new diamond. "Tyler's surprised me. Business has been so good since you left," and told me I looked like I was still buying my clothes from a discount bin, that I could have avoided all this if I'd just apologized. I looked at that ring and didn't see romance. I leaned in close enough that only the two of them could hear and asked, quietly, whether the stone was paid for out of the Delaware account or the Cayman one this time, because the wire fees between the two were getting expensive, especially when you're pulling straight from the fleet detailing budget for it. Brooke's bag hit the floor. A perfume bottle inside shattered across the tile. My mother snapped at her about the mess. Brooke couldn't even hear her. She was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "How do you know that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just told her to be more careful with expensive things, because you never know when they disappear, and I walked away. 2 days later, a thick cream envelope arrived at my apartment with the Brennan Motors gold seal pressed into the flap. Inside was a formal invitation to the company's 20th anniversary gala, and a letter from Walt requesting my presence in a private meeting room an hour before the event, to discuss settling our family matter once and for all. I already knew what it meant before I opened the second envelope sitting next to it. The draft of a non-disclosure and inheritance waiver Tyler's lawyer had emailed to the wrong recipient list 2 days earlier, copying an old company-wide address that still routed to an inbox I technically had access to from my internship days. The offer, $500,000, drawn from the dealership's emergency reserve, in exchange for my signature, giving up any claim to the family, the business, or ever speaking about what I knew, with a $5 million penalty if I ever broke silence. Walt had approved it himself according to the email chain, terrified of a public scandal during his anniversary weekend, more than he was concerned about where Tyler was actually getting $500,000 on short notice. I forwarded the entire chain to Calloway. He added witness tampering and attempted bribery to the growing list. The arrest warrants were signed by Friday afternoon. Saturday night, I drove to the Carolina Country Club ballroom in a black dress I'd bought for exactly this occasion, armor with no softness to it. The valet line was backed up with luxury SUVs. Inside, string lights, an open bar, 200 guests who all knew my family from church and the Chamber of Commerce, all of whom had read Brooke's Facebook post and decided, without asking me a single question, that I was the unstable one. Heads turned the second I walked in. Walt spotted me first, his face hardening, and crossed the ballroom fast with my mother trailing him. "You were supposed to use the side entrance," my mother hissed. "You're embarrassing us." "I just wanted to see the decorations," I said. "Looks like you spent a lot of stolen money on them." Tyler appeared at Walt's shoulder, playing peacemaker, guiding me toward the private room with that same sympathetic smile he'd used the night he told me to get professional help. I let him lead the way. I was ready to sign exactly what they'd prepared. The private room had 3 lawyers waiting at a long table, the check already sitting there, $500,000, my name typed across it. Walt sat at the head of the table and told me, without an ounce of self-awareness, that Tyler had doubled the company's profits in 3 years and that I was a disappointment wearing a cheap dress. My mother told me to sign and disappear before I ruined the night. I picked up the check. I looked at the signature line, then up at Tyler, and asked him, conversationally, where exactly $500,000 in liquidity had come from when the main operating account only had $200,000 in it as of Thursday. I told him about the Delaware routing number. I told him about Q Reports Internal. I told him about the Cayman Holding Company and the 5 trusts it fed in Connecticut, registered to his own parents and brothers. Tyler's hands started shaking before I even finished the sentence. "She's lying," he said to no one in particular, his voice climbing. "She's making up numbers." I opened my briefcase and set the folder on the table. "I have every wire transfer, every invoice, every email and security footage of the 2 of you forging signatures in Brooke's office," I said. "You've stolen over $11 million from this company in 3 years." That's when the doors blew open. 6 agents in treasury vests, Callaway in front, badges out, voices loud enough to silence the entire room through the walls. Tyler lunged for the folder and didn't make it within a foot of the table before 2 agents had him pinned against the wall in cuffs, sobbing that he could give them names, that he was just following orders. Brooke screamed and tried to run to him. A female agent blocked her path. My mother grabbed my father's arm and started crying that this had to be a mistake. Walt demanded to know who I thought I was to do this to his family. I reached into my dress and pulled out my badge. "My name is Special Agent Reagan," I said, holding it up so the gold caught the chandelier light. "I'm the lead investigator on this case. I've been building it for 6 months. Every routing number, every account, I found it myself. The same night you cut off my tuition and called me ungrateful." Walt physically stumbled back like the badge had burned him. My mother went pale and silent. Brooke dropped to her knees screaming that she didn't know what she was signing, that I had to believe her, that she was my sister. I looked down at her and felt nothing close to mercy. "I have the audio of you laughing about how oblivious your father is while you forged those invoices," I said. "You're not a victim. Your arrest warrant is in this folder right next to your husband's." They cuffed her there on the marble floor in front of 200 guests who'd believed her Facebook post 6 months earlier and now stood frozen, drinks in hand, not one of them willing to meet my eyes. My mother crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my dress, begging me to fix it, to tell them it was a mistake, to remember Brooke was her baby. I gently pulled my dress out of her hands. "I came to you privately 6 months ago with everything I'd found," I said. "You chose them. You don't get to ask me to undo it now." Walt sank into a chair, staring at the folder Callaway had dropped in front of him, paging through the routing numbers and the trust names in Connecticut, finally understanding that the son-in-law he'd worshipped for his last name had spent 3 years quietly bleeding the company dry to bail out his own family's debts, with his daughter signing off on every page. I walked out of that private room and back through the ballroom, past 200 people who'd called me a liar without ever once asking me a single question, and out into the warm parking lot where Callaway's SUV was already waiting with the engine running. "You did good work tonight," he said as I climbed in. "Yeah," I said, watching the lights of the country club shrink in the side mirror. "I did." Walt lost the dealerships within the year, seized assets, federal fines, a company that didn't exist anymore by the time the case went to trial. Tyler took a plea deal and is doing 14 years. Brooke got 8. My mother still calls sometimes, asking when I'll come home, like there's a home left to come back to. I let it go to voicemail more often than not these days. I'm not angry anymore, not the way I used to be. I just understand something now that took me 26 years and a federal badge to learn. You can't save people who'd rather lose everything than admit they chose the wrong child to believe.